That should work if it's just in the middle there. And it's highly open to editing. In fact, it'll be edited to shit. Okay, alright. We'll just take out the gems and splice them together and make it seem like
make ourselves look really
totally
good.
coherent.
Yes.
So, you said it quite a long time ago, and it's come up a few times, and it has stuck with me. When you said that what people think they accept as being sacred because they've thought it. Because it happens, because it's in their thoughts, it's in their heads, they just assume it must be valid in some way or worth listening to and follow it. And it stuck with me because there are so many different voices, and if you're not distinguishing what those voices are and where they're coming from, then you're pretty much at the mercy of anything you think. And quite possibly, a lot of what you think is just is probably not sacred or worthwhile.
Somewhat questionable.
Exactly. And so the thing is, it's a very interesting way to look at things, because if you start to distinguish what those voices are, and we've had discussions before about, and I remember also clearly about you saying almost the day that you can remember hearing your ego actually speaking. Almost, I think the way you described it was kind of like
inner dialogue.
Like an inner dialogue, almost like a radio that was switched on,
yes.
and you could actually distinguish the separate voice in a
yes.
way that was speaking. You could identify it as being the ego, the negative ego, in that case. And so it's a really useful way of understanding things, is to understand where those voices or thoughts are coming from. Because there are so many of them, and I thought maybe it's a good idea to look at what some of those possible voices or patterns of thinking are.
Okay. Why did it stick with you? What did... because you have mentioned it before, and I'm curious about it. It's fascinating that how did that show up for you as being useful or important?
I guess obviously I must have thought the same at some stage.
Do you have an experience of where you were able to identify a voice that was automated, or maybe not, maybe not what you would identify as you now? Did you have an awakening moment? That was my awakening moment, is when I actually heard a voice and realized that it wasn't me. So
it sounds like a very clear moment for you, but for me it's at times on an ongoing basis now, where I'll suddenly recognize a pattern of thinking or a pattern of behaving that has come from obviously a pattern of thinking, and think and sort of realize that's my mother, that's my father, that's a pattern that's not it's an inherited pattern.
Yes,
it's that I obviously learnt, and it kicks in as a default, and it's there, and it could be a pattern of self-pity. Or
and you recognize it, and then you
recognize it. Yeah.
I've seen this before, and you look and you go, "Oh my gosh, this is what one of my primary caregivers did." And then you notice, you don't remember making a decision that you were going to take that on, but then you start noticing a pattern of that. Feels exactly the same as you recognize it as one of your parents.
Yeah.
There's a saying about that. You become an adult when your primary caregivers live in your head. So you don't need them anymore.
Yeah, but that's pretty frightening.
It is kind of frightening, actually.
Because that's not the adult I want to be.
Yeah, I would have to agree. So let's talk about that for a second. So, why is it so important for us to actually be able to, why isn't that an adult that we want to be? What's the downside?
I don't think it's a responsible way of being in the world. I think it's a reactive way of being in the world. I think that my parents were reactive to their situations, They did a lot of things by default, which they probably learned from their parents. So if I'm just inheriting those patterns, I'm inheriting my grandparents' patterns, my great-grandparents' patterns. These are patterns that may or may not have been functional 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Certainly not functional for me now. And they're certainly not appropriate for me now, because they're conditioned from past events. They're not current. It's not me responding in an appropriate way to what I'm dealing with at this point. It's a conditioned pattern, even if it's 50 years ago.
Yes.
Or 100, or less, 20 years ago. It's completely not useful at this point right now. So that's not the adult I want to be.
I think it was, I really wonder how useful it ever was. But it was common, and that we really didn't look at what, for me, the demarcating, what am I going to say? The demarcating description, or how I would describe where these things come from, is from fear. Is that it's fear-based, and pretty much anything that's along that's my criteria as well. Is that I look at what is the fear, and then I take a look at what the voice is. I take a look at what the content is, and then I go, is this fear-based? And either it is or it isn't. And if it is, then I actually have to look at what that fear is, and decide whether look directly at what am I. The process is what am I protecting? What is it? You can figure out what the fear is one way or another. It's usually fairly obvious to us if we just ask ourselves, so what would be the fear with this pattern, with this thought, with this idea, with this emotion, this motivation that I have? What is the motivation? And when it is fear, I had to decide that I didn't want to be motivated by fear, especially when I found out that if the world is a reflection of what it is that I put out, let's just pretend for a moment that whatever I'm putting out into the world is coming back to me as a reflection of my own thinking, and everybody's experience is different, and what they're putting out is what they're getting back. It's virtually creating your life. There's a saying, is worry is prayer for the things that you don't want. So that's kind of how I was a really easy line to walk, is this fear? Do I believe in this fear? Is this important to me? Is it real? Do I want to be creating this? And ultimately the answers were no and no and no. So it became very easy about, I don't want to live from fear. I don't actually want to be reactive. I don't want my decisions to be made up from fear. So that's maybe pretty far down the line, but how does that make you feel?
No, that makes sense to me, because I tend to think of things in terms of certainly choices. The choices that I make based in, are either fear choices or growth choices. And so in every situation there's an opportunity to react based on a fear attached in some way, or to choose something because it's a growth choice and it will allow for more expansion and more opportunity to become more of who I really am, as opposed to the fear choices which are contracting.
So when we come back to, having said that, and having, there's growth choices and there's fear choices, I like that saying, is that how is it being useful to go back a little bit and go, everything that I think is sacred. A lot of people believe that everything that they think is sacred because they're feeling and experiencing it, they don't virtually question it. So what would you have to say to people that if somebody is in that place of that they're, if it's inside of me, then it's there for a reason, and it, I have my own best interest in mind. So, what I'm feeling must be sacred, must be useful, must be what why would I question it? What would you have to say to somebody that goes, yeah, that's what I feel, that's what I think, that's how I live my life, my reactions are my reactions, and they're, it's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. What would your input be?
That would be coming from someone who has a sense that everything is part of the same aspect of themselves. That they're not distinguishing between different aspects of themselves. They're not distinguishing between an ego or or other patterns or voices that could be present in their thinking.
What if they said, "So what? What's an ego?" I mean, I don't speak that much about that. I do speak about the ego, but I really just, because the ego is so complicated and vast and has so many different jobs, and there's positive parts in my mind and there's negative parts in my mind to what the ego does, is that I just say fear-based, the part of the ego that's fear-based. But that's not a common, we weren't taught that in school, and most people, and the people that were taught that in school, and most people's experience when they talk about it, your average person, their knowledge of the ego really doesn't provide much utility, as far as I can tell. So what, like as a generalization, what would you say to somebody to say, I think there's a lot of people that don't really have much ability to be able to see that there's different voices. They don't even seem to be particularly curious a lot of the time. They just go, this is me, and I'm just going to do me.
Yeah, then I'd probably speak to something that they are experiencing, because if they're not experiencing that distinction or those nuances,
yes,
then probably investigate their sense of separation from their experience, their sense of separation from others, their sense of separation from the world. Because if they're not distinguishing those different aspects, it's probably highly likely that they are being governed by them.
Yes.
Because they're not able to
can't see them. Exactly. You are going to be used by them.
You're used by them. So even something like the ego in its negative state, like you're saying, not in the positive, but in its negative form, will take certain things that they value and will turn it against them and use it as a form of separation, either making them feel better than or less than, or in some way separate from others. Or the ego is going to try and control every experience that they have rather than allowing them to have the experience, and therefore separate them from their experience, from their lives, from the world that they're living. So there'd be an experience of separation and a distance or numbing or not being part of their own lives. That in that way you could address that and say, well, okay, if you're not happy with that, then these are potentially some of the causes for it. Because I think this whole issue of separation and alienation is so widespread and becoming more and more because of people not addressing those nuanced.
I think that when you say separation, my entry point is usually pain and crises, and I have a fairly strong belief that human beings learn particularly about the negative parts of the ego through crises and through pain, and which you illustrate in, I think, is it fair to say that the separation that you're looking at and having them look at is virtue of the pain they're experiencing?
Sure. Yeah.
So you also said something else that I keep forgetting about because I usually don't end up working with them, is the people that are in crises are the ones where their separation is causing pain in their life because there's things that they want that they're not getting, that they do feel the separation and it's painful for them in some kind of way, that they're not getting what they want out of life, and there's a saying about your ego's brought you down to your knees, and that's when people start looking at something being different. The other, I just want to, even if it's just briefly, is the people that are using the ego to be superior, and the ones that are particularly good at that, is that they don't really seem to get into crises. And I haven't had much experience of somebody that thinks their interpretation in life is, and how they always see everything is, that they're have a superior view, they're a superior person, they are making superior decisions. I don't really deal with that much. They don't really seem to come to crises.
But at some level, it it would, or it must, because the thing is that that's not a sustainable situation. Because if the ego is functioning like that, and it is creating that kind of separation, and let's say that it's predominantly using a sense of superiority or better than, then if that no longer becomes functional, it will use the opposite. So it'll take those same values that somebody sees as being better than, and flip them around to create a situation where you come into contact with somebody who has more of those values, or more of whatever it is that you are holding as being superior than, in order to create a lesser
somebody
situation.
with a balanced state of superiority and not good enough. That's kind of what you're pointing to. I think I was thinking more of, because I don't deal with that much. It's either normal people, like normal in the sense, but normal in the sense that they have a degree of not good enough, or just people that are just like trying. They have a fairly good outlook about self. They see themselves more or less, other than the normal everyday comparisons with other people. That person's a little bit better and this one's not. But I'm thinking more of the extremes. I very rarely deal with people that really aren't good enough, and usually there's a level of victim mentality that goes with that, which isn't easy to deal with. It's actually quite difficult to deal with. Or on the other side of things is the people that think they're superior. And I guess I was thinking more of kind of a manic form of it, or what's that called? Where they constantly are seeing themselves as in a better way. They're kind
sort of a delusional.
Yeah, they're bulletproof. Is what it is. So those are the two extremes. So I very rarely deal with those people that really see themselves as superior. I've never actually seen them crash into not being good enough. Do you have that? Have you been around that at all?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Because in the sense, I think it's something that, if you're using a particular value or quality to somehow separate from others by making that a way of feeling better than other people, then it can just as easily flip into being less than. Okay. It's two sides of the same.
Yeah, I know.
Because, look, this is the way I see it: is that the ego is not interested in authenticity. The ego is interested in being accepted, in being approved of by others.
Yes.
So really it sort of promotes mediocrity in a way, because it goes for approval and acceptance and appraisal by others, which generally means you're striving for mediocrity, because authenticity is not going to put you necessarily in that realm of approval by others. No. So if you want to go for maximum approval, you're probably going to end up mediocre. So the ego, in a sense, is not promoting a real, authentic self, and it's not, and it's also trying to control experience, and experience is the means of accessing or getting to the authentic self.
Yeah, so with the mediocrity of being approved and being seen a particular way, you've already got an outcome in mind about how you want to be seen. You're virtually not really looking at self as what is my expression? What is the truth about me? Is that being, to the degree that you are roped in by, that you need to be accepted by the society, the people around you that are saying this is good and this is bad, which is really kind of a shame that we actually live that way, that we have I call it the cookie cutter, a list of things that you need to be and not be, or you're going to be judged by the world in some kind of way, so that you're not doing life right. And it really does, to the degree that you believe in that, and to the degree that your upbringing was that you to get approval you needed to behave a certain way, is usually the people that have accepted that in some kind of way. And really it's at the cost of feeling, what am I, who am I, what's actually going on in there, what kind of human being, what is my true expression. and that a lot of people never really becomes overly important to them to be able to do that. There's really a sadness for that for me, is that I just know how not interested I am in what people are supposed to look like, given that there's 7 billion people. They're all different. They all have a gift. They all need to be able to live their life in a particular way, to learn what they need to learn on their journey of who they are. Nobody can predetermine that. If you're doing something, that's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what you're supposed to be learning. And there's lots of things in my life, for example, where I said, "Oh God, I'll never do that again." That didn't feel good. And 2 weeks later, I'm doing it again, one more time. Somehow I figured that I'd do it, and I go, God, okay, now I remember why I didn't do that. And, 4 weeks after that, I'm doing it yet another time. But that was the last time. I went, okay, now, I'm definitely not doing that again. So, and that's the process that you actually have to go through to be able to really figure out who you are and what your expression is and how the world works as opposed to how the world is supposed to work. So coming back to your original question of that, people being able to look at, just because you're feeling it doesn't mean it's sacred, and that your authenticity, and and that I like coming up with a playing field. So we've got this pull to, we're feeling things, and we've never been told that what you're feeling isn't sacred. We've never gone, there's some things to look out for here. We've never been told that in our normal education, or having a series of elders telling us about the human condition. That's not something that was available to me. And then there's this authenticity that there's a difference between authenticity and what's just inside of you. So it looks like we're at the place of having people look at their inner world, and that there might be a choice here. What are we talking about? What would you...
Well, I think the realization that there is that choice is essential ultimately. I'm still stuck on the word you used earlier, which was sadness. When you described the sadness of not recognizing or you use that to describe that sense of wanting to do things in a particular way, or complete a checklist of how your life should look. Because I know that feeling. I've experienced that sadness of realizing that probably from childhood I've done so much to accomplish exactly that, of wanting that acceptance or approval or certain things that need to be done, and then getting to a point in my life where there was just a really deep sadness that I'd wasted so much time trying to create this particular way of being, which ultimately is just a mediocre cookie cutter, you described it, way of being, which is not authentic to who I am. It's not an authentic expression of self. And so there's definite sadness around realizing that. But until realizing that at a certain point, I was gung-ho, just trying to accomplish that. Not even realizing there was a choice. So it brings us to this point of, yes, realizing that there actually is a choice. But you have to access something first. You have to access some sense that there's more to you than just this...
some angst, maybe?
Yeah. Just a pinch? Just a pinch
of angst. Yeah, it's getting to, if what you're describing is resonating with anybody, that is being able to look at, then the answer is what's authentic? What is my true expression? Am I following the rules and the list of things that I need to do to be approved by my world? Just out of curiosity, do you know what the motivating, as you grew up, what happened for you that motivated you to be interested in that list? Do you know what that was?
And to figure out what that list is and how to accomplish it.
Yeah, well, the list of what people, like, at some point you got invested in the checklist of what the world wanted you to be. Do you have any recollection of how that got in place?
My sense of it is that it happened at a very early age, and that it was, as a child, I realized that there were certain things that I could do that would please my parents, and if I did that, the world seemed to be okay. I felt safe, and if I didn't do that, the world didn't feel safe. So I think it originally came from a sense of safety as a child.
Yes.
And I took that on, and then going through adolescence, there's a lot of insecurity around adolescence and all that kind of thing. So I think it just amplified at that stage.
Okay, so the anxiety of adolescence, if your refuge was already finding out what you needed to do to be accepted, then you just applied that, thinking some more. Just in contrast, I'll talk about my, as a kid, is that I just did what I wanted to do. And I did what felt right to me. And the things that other people were doing and telling me, I'd listen to what people were saying. I was just like, well, that's not what I want to do. Why is that going to make me happy?
Okay, now how did you get to that? See, now that to me is fascinating, because it is completely not my experience.
And it wasn't an easy road. You became a little bit of a lightning rod of hate a little bit, is that I had cousins that were their parents in particular, their mother was very strict. I mean, they had spelling bees at the dinner table. Seriously, during summer holidays, they had spelling bees. I went and stayed with them for a couple months when I was very young. And I couldn't believe, I couldn't spell my way out of a wet paper bag, and she was using it to actually measure how her children were better than my parents' children, specifically me. And I didn't really care about spelling bees, frankly. And
so what did you do with that situation?
I just kind of there was a lot of anger and angst about how you needed to be. Like, it went to this degree. I remember I was setting the table on my job. One of my jobs was setting the table, or this particular day. I don't remember if it was every day. And so I was going, it wasn't my family, and there was a fair number of people, so I was counting to myself about how many plates I needed to bring out. And so I'm like, 1, 2, and I'm kind of speaking out loud, but under my breath, and it was only her and I in the kitchen, and she, yelled at me, got in my face, and I remember seeing the little veins in her nose, and about that, if you can't say something out loud, don't say anything at all. Because I was counting to myself. It was so traumatizing and shocking that was actually an issue. I never had that in my life. So then I was like, got back, to myself after I kind of figured out what to do with the trauma and pushing that away. And then went, what am I doing? Oh, yes, figuring out how many people are sitting at the table. And I went, 1, 2. I did the whole thing all over again. She went bananas. She actually went bananas. So I just went, and it didn't make any sense to me. So that was really easy about the cookie cutter and how you were supposed to behave, as some of it was so nutty. And it just wasn't my parents were very much about, they let me be me. And and I had the experience of that I was loved for me. And that if I got punished, it wasn't because of me, it was because of my behaviors. And I'm not even sure they had that distinction, but I never felt that I was a bad person. I always felt I had done something bad, and I did a lot of bad. So I was always into something and doing something and breaking something and leaving the hose on outside where it would, for hours and hours on end, close to the house where it flooded our basement, went seeped through the cement wall. And being in Canada, everybody had a basement, so that was like things like that. Or mixing. I got in a lot of trouble. But it was adventure. Life was an adventure, and I was just following what was in my heart. And I just never got. People talk about when they had an experience where they had somebody put their thumb on them, and they kind of broke them. I think is the experience that I had of that. Is that to different levels of how much they could handle trauma is what it seemed to be. So if they could handle if they had very little trauma, and the gods in their life, their primary caregivers, were upset with them, all they had to do is a little bit upset, and they would crumble and then just start following the list of things they need to do. And then I hear stories of that people, had a sense of themselves, but somebody, usually a parent, would break them of, no, you're going to do what I want you to do. And then to varying degrees of creating a rebel. And I'm going to do eventually when they get to teenagehood, and they're going to go, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to do the opposite of what you say. only because it's the opposite of what you say, which has its own downside.
Well, it's almost the same thing, isn't it?
It is almost the same thing. You are, and then they become
still
rebels.
Reacting to,
still reacting, and it's still not coming from me.
It's still not an authentic expression of who you are.
Yeah. So that was me. I don't think most people are like me, but people think that would be easier. It's not easier. It's not easier just to do.
Why is it not easier? Because when I'm hearing that your parents accepted you for who you are and that
I was fine at home.
Why doesn't... I
went to school. I had cousins. I went out in the world. Every time we had a family, outing, I was the one, all the other kids, I don't know what, spider senses they had that I didn't. But, they would hear a parent coming down the hallway. It's like pandemonium, 15 cousins in a bedroom with 2 beds in it. And everybody else would stop moving and sit down. I have an actual memory of this. And then I'm standing on the bed. Everybody, they're all sitting down as this, particular auntie came in, which was the very, very strict one. And I'm the only one standing on a bed 2 seconds ago. Everybody else was doing, I don't know what actually happened there, but I don't know how they heard that, but I was the only one that didn't. So between not being aware of or caring about what the big people were doing, I guess, and really being designed to do what I wanted to do, just experiencing me. So what wasn't easy about it is that my whole life I haven't gone the way everybody else has gone, and that has consequences. People do look at you, and the more they know about your life, the more that they actually judge you and make you wrong. And if they have any kind of power in your life, they can make your life a little bit miserable as well, or any kind of pull whatsoever. So it actually has caused me to, create. I don't let everybody see, who I am or what's going on, or the decisions that I make. So I did learn to, if I'm going to be me, then then we have to put a little bit of there's just not full expression of that. I learned that.
Okay. I'm struggling a little bit with that because that sounds then that starts to become a little bit like my experience, where it feels like you need to...
A little bit. No, I just don't tell them. I don't act the way they want me to act. What I do is I just don't go, there's pieces of information you really don't need to know. And the reason why I'm saying this is there was times in my life that I would just be me. I'd tell everybody everything, regardless of who they were. And that seemed to have consequences. I mean, it's just smart to not tell everybody in your life. I mean, you don't need to be at work. By the time I got to work, that was well established. But I think that's just social behaviors that are accepted. You don't need to tell everybody about, your entire life just because they asked. You don't really need to do that. There are consequences for that. I didn't start out there. I was very much, just me and was willing to be me. And, so that I did get some equilibrium on that. I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to be able to do that, as you imagine. So I think that being able to accept how much I did just say who I was and was what I was, I think is the interesting part. But it wasn't an easy life. If people think that sounds easier, it wasn't. It was not easier.
So a sense of... I'm just trying to refine this understanding of where that sense of what is authentic and what is not authentic, because it's like going back to my experience was to try and read the cues as accurately as possible. and become
good for
really...
you. I've heard about those cues.
Yeah, exactly. And I know those cues. I know those cues as well. Because you get to read them more and more and more, and you get subtle understandings of what those cues are.
And how you should behave for this particular person or group or etc. I didn't invest. I was so busy going, what am I feeling in this situation? And what's going on for me? And being able to feel in the moment what I'm feeling and be able to respond authentically about what I was feeling. That didn't require cues. I wasn't interested. That wasn't, understanding the cues of what other people were doing was not part of that criteria.
Which means that you were more internally focused.
Yes.
Whereas my upbringing, I was more externally focused because I was reading external cues all the time, and then responding with, this is what I feel I need to do in this situation.
You had more math to do than I did.
Yeah.
I got in more trouble than you did.
Yeah.
So I made all kinds of faux pas, and even to the day, I actually sometimes have to ask people, okay, what are the social cues in this situation? I don't ask it like that, but that's really what it comes down to often, because there's people around me that are really, really good at that, and also they had to learn to be dedicated to their own authenticity, and they have more of a balance, but they came from the side of, you don't need to really irritate a whole bunch of people by missing a whole bunch of very simple social cues. But I'm still not particularly dedicated to them. I'm probably a little bit more appropriate, but I still, to a degree, I've come to the place where I don't actually care that much. So I can be appropriate enough that I'm not upsetting people too often. That's neither here nor there type upsets. Like, you don't really need to say that type stuff.
There's still a discrepancy there. So I'm going back to what you said right in the beginning. That if you want to, in a sense, you can look at the world that you experience. Your experience of the world is a reflection of what's happening internally. So, in a sense, if there was complete integration,
yes.
I mean, this is what we're talking about.
Yes.
In a sense of, we sort of, in a way.
Yes.
So what I feel is we're looking at integration between the internal
yes.
and the external.
Yeah.
We're looking at our external reality reflecting as accurately as possible
yes.
our internal, in a way that makes sense to us.
Yes.
So, surely, what we're talking about in an ideal situation would be that we are having reflected back to us very much an authentic expression of, or an expression of our authenticity as much as possible, right?
What we're getting by the people that we're interacting with, is that what you're saying?
Or our experience of the world generally would be, I mean, in an ideal situation.
My experience is an authentic experience of what's going on around me. I start there, for sure. But I don't necessarily...
Which means you have to deal with aspects, like the shadow aspects as well, because you...
Yes.
Because you have to include all of it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so there's
a specific part of the shadow that you're referring to. I need clarity on this.
You mean what I mean by shadow?
No, what the discrepancy.
So, the discrepancy in the sense of that certain things would be appropriate to express and certain things are not appropriate to express.
Yes.
Understandably, in certain situations,
yes.
there's different levels of what's appropriate. But in terms of your experience of it, in terms of your experience of...
Not picking up those cues, yes, or not being interested in them as well.
If you are, like you've said now, if you are understanding your experience as an authentic expression or as an accurate reflection
yes.
of what's happening, in order to engage with that properly, you would have to accept all of it, right?
What people are doing, like people's cues?
Cues, everything.
Yeah, so I do, I might not, see, because I do find it fairly all-encompassing. My feelings in any given moment, if I really truly want to know what I'm feeling in this moment, takes, pretty much all the bits that I have. I don't necessarily go taste the experience, go, okay, what are the cues and what's acceptable here, and then go back to feeling me. I do that maybe to a degree, actually, now. And I might have done it to a degree then. But I was more dedicated. It felt like there was so much work to do just to feel me accurately and work out my thoughts and work out my feelings and work out what my expression was, that I wasn't really looking at the social cues. I didn't have that.
Yes, but you obviously trusted what you were feeling.
I did trust what I was feeling, because I listened to what other people told me about how I should behave and what should go on, and I was going, that's a really bad idea. You don't look happy. You don't look particularly smart. Like even as a kid, I'm describing more of from a child to my 20s time in there mostly, because I think I've integrated a little bit since then, and it's probably not so all encompassing to feel what I'm feeling. I have it's a lot easier to be able to process all of that and quicker. So I think I'm more appropriate, but I'm still not entirely appropriate. I'm not always audience aware because I don't really care. I don't care enough to actually, now the people that I care about, or the ones that I figured out the ones that I care about the cueing to a degree, but I still am more interested in expressing myself. And I'll be contrary. Now, instead of just, pushing everybody's button and getting a whole bunch of upset that's really unnecessary, I will, I might be more aware of what's going on there. I might not care. And I'll be more appropriate about, so I'll say nothing if that's appropriate, or I'll actually start challenging people's views. I do that quite regularly. And I will do it in a nice way. I don't necessarily need to be upsetting people. But if I don't particularly like their views as well, I might not care about that either. I might.
The way I'm hearing it is that it's not about looking at the external cues and then deciding whether or not to go with a particular behavior that will either please or displease. It's more about understanding what's authentic to you, and then with that realization or with that understanding,
yes,
to then choose
yes
what to do in a situation.
Yes. That's more of how it is now. But I was just thinking more, it's like when you're making these decisions, like more of the formative years and more of the beginning how to figure out how to express self. It was much more difficult then. So, but but I was on the side of that I almost had no, and I think it's a bit of a blessing for me actually, and ultimately I guess it would have to be, since that's what I did, that I wasn't really, that interested in what the social cues were. I wasn't interested in, how you need to look and behave. And I was more interested in actually having the experience that really, what's making me excited right now? What's really, what am I interested in? What glows for me? And I went there and behaved that way and did that. And in my family, you were accepted. I had an opinion as a child. As long as I didn't abuse it and, I wasn't being whiny or just thinking about myself. But our family made group decisions about almost everything. And then they go, oh, what do you think? I'd say, even as a kid, about vacations and what we were going to do and where we were going to go and what we wanted to do today and that kind of stuff. And I felt my opinion had value. And a lot of times it didn't, but plenty of the times it did. I knew intrinsically who I was okay. I was accepted, and what my needs and values and ideas were had a place.
Okay, so all of that you've just said now, I mean, you felt accepted.
Yes.
Your needs and values had a
deep
place.
sense of acceptance.
A deep sense of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the things you're describing are things that not everyone feels.
I've come to that conclusion. I didn't know that for a fairly long time, that most people felt by their family that they didn't feel accepted, that they didn't feel that, included, that there was a way they needed to be. It was dramatic. And my brother, the interesting thing is that my brother and I have an older brother, he has a very different experience. So I'm really wondering how much of that was my parents and how much of that was also me. A very large part of it was my parents. But he had a different experience. He felt judged. I don't think he felt, he was more of a rebel. He felt more of that he was being told what to do. So I don't know if they really changed their behaviors that much with me, or I don't know.
Well, you just had a very different experience, because there's obviously certain things about your particular experience that allowed you to develop in that way. What do you think it was that, what's the essence or the spark or the drive that allowed you to experience your parents in that way, or upbringing in that way, and to develop?
I felt loved and accepted. That was good enough for me. And then I think I had a dedication to feeling what I was feeling. I didn't even understand, the upset that, like as a little kid, I had a lot of upset and ways that you're supposed to behave as a kid, and I just didn't do that. I was noisy. I ran around like a crazy person. Kids are usually getting in trouble when they're laughing. When they're having fun and, experiencing and screaming and doing all the stuff they're doing, they're generally having fun. And I got chastised a lot for that, and I was usually either a ringleader or the loudest one in the bunch, and it never really stopped me. I don't know why. It never really factored that much for me.
Because for a lot of kids, this is exactly, their experience is that, I mean, they can be happy now, they can be ecstatic, then they can be sad, then they can be crying about something, then they can be this. And so they move through emotions. They're not attached to them. They're moving through and flowing through different emotions.
They were fluid for me, yeah.
And very fluid. And they're experiencing what they're experiencing, and they're reacting. It's all encompassing. If something happens now, you're completely upset, you're overwhelmed. then you're happy, then you're this. But somehow you get trained out of that, because in a sense it becomes that certain things are okay to express and certain things are not okay to express. Certain things are acceptable, so other things are not acceptable. And so things start to become divided up into categories, and there's certain avenues of expression are shut down and other ones are encouraged. You know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
as you grow up, you start to, and then of course those things that are shut down start to move more into the shadow.
Yes.
In the sense that those are not acceptable, so you pull those back, you hide those away, you don't express those, and they build up, as part of the shadow. And so it seems that for most kids, that would be more the experience. For most people now, most adults would have a sense of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. That it probably comes from childhood, and so a lot of that content in the shadow has no place to go. It can. Well, it's not. As a kid,
It's submerged.
It's exactly, and so and if it's not owned, then it can only be expressed in the world.
Yes.
And so people's experience of the world is a lot of that shadow.
Yes. Yes.
But it's a lot of what they're not willing to own within themselves.
What got beaten.
Exactly. So coming back to what we were saying about the external being a reflection of the internal.
Yes.
If you have to accept that as an expression of everything and all the parts of yourself.
Yes.
Then you're having to accept all of that as part of yourself.
You're talking about the shadow parts now.
It may be part of the shadow, especially the stuff that you look externally and you don't see. The stuff is difficult to own.
Yeah. It's but it's so interesting is that you're a kid. You have virtually no self-reflection ability whatsoever. So much is happening for you for the first time, and that you really don't have. You're not mature enough to, or had enough experience to be able to do anything with that, and that it's so formative for what it is that we're what the rest of our life the shape of the rest of our life. How that occurs is it's not easy to actually do that at all. So what's the I guess we're only really dealing with individuals that have come to that place, and that they've come to some kind of angst, and that they're asking some kind of question, and they're looking for there's some kind of anxiety, there's some kind of feeling about that something needs to be different here. I want to they have a sense of self, I guess. And that anxiety is pointing to, and there's maybe a little bit of a crisis, is that I need to do this life that I'm doing. There's a saying about when our ego brings us down to our knees, is that when we're doing things, the way we were operating, and we've done it for so long, it starts to pile up after a while, and it forces us to actually look at something's not right, something's not good here, something's not making me happy. I really don't think people really look that deeply unless there is that anxiety of, and it's significant enough that they're going, no, something's got to be happier than this.
Well, there's the opportunity there for a big shift to happen, because probably up until that point, someone's been invested in changing the circumstances around them, changing other people, manipulating a situation to get a particular outcome, this kind of thing. And there's that certain point where something happens and you think, okay, well, maybe there's something I can change with myself. Maybe there's something I can do differently. Maybe there's something internal, something about me that's generating all of this.
Yes.
And that's where I need to look.
What gets like in your case? What actually had you do that? Like that time, I think in life is a really important time when that anxiety builds, and I think that there's usually, if it's a real powerful change, it's usually to the same size of a crisis that somebody has. So what actually had you look? I'm assuming that you had a time like that in your life.
Yeah. So for me, I somehow managed to sustain that type of situation of because ultimately you're not just pleasing your parents. As you grow up, your parents are less significant.
Yes.
It just gets transferred onto the entire world.
Yeah.
So
relationships, work,
Everything.
social,
all relationships,
inner circle, and the rest of the world.
You know, obviously, the more significant the relationship, the more need to please.
Okay, yes,
so
yes.
It becomes
in varying
amplified.
degrees. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it just, like you're saying, accumulated because eventually it becomes impossible to read all the cues and to respond appropriately or respond in a way that pleases everybody all the time.
Yeah.
It's just an impossible situation.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, you should know that. I should know.
Yeah.
Everyone should know. It's an impossible situation. It cannot be done.
Yeah.
But I tried.
Yeah.
And I nearly broke myself in the process because it's maybe someone said it to me quite a while back, and I didn't really understand it at the time. But they said the way you're operating now is you're like a thermometer thermostat that's governing the temperature or something, and you set to different temperatures.
Yes.
Eventually, it has to break.
Yes.
Because it cannot be set to different temperatures. You can drive yourself crazy trying to be at all those different temperatures.
If there's one person in the room, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
But the more people that are in the room that you care about,
yeah.
then that's when you're going to break.
Yeah.
Is that you're going to be so fragmented is what it's going to come down to. Because what you're going to experience in the world is based on who you're going to see yourself as, is going to be all the cueing that you're getting, and that you're going to be a little bit of this character and a little bit of that character and a little bit. It'd be really confusing about what self is. It would be that you're constantly actually having to, and you get so good at it. It would be like a second. It would be your first way of being, that you're just constantly going, taste a little bit of that, feel where they are, know what they want, and then be able to provide that for them. And that it would be your investment in who you are is that would be very difficult, because the better at that you got, and the more unconscious that it was that it would become, the more fragmented you'd be, and it would be just so difficult to actually really have a real solid experience of self. And it couldn't be particularly satisfying at some level. And then, like you said, the breaking point when that thermometer actually breaks.
Yeah, but even then I didn't realize
that's
exactly
what
it was.
Yeah.
And my solution was still to try and fix things externally. So I thought, well, the solution is to isolate myself.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Which is a way of bypassing the entire issue.
Well, yeah.
So,
but if the problem is that you have to cue yourself, to get a sense of self, you actually have to eliminate the cues. Because you didn't even have the insight, and you're transformational and have been for a very long time. You understand the inner world, and this was hidden from you for a fairly long amount of time, with all of your understanding, training, and inclination. Look at what other people are dealing with, because the interesting point is that you had no idea that was your operating mechanism of what you were doing, and that you couldn't see it directly and see it for what it was and make the choices about it. When we make whatever choice that we make quite early on about how we're going to our modus operandi, is that we get good at it and we don't question that. That's
this is exactly it. Even though people had actually mentioned this to me before,
yeah,
and they'd observed it, and I just, no, that's the way I am. That's just what I do. It's almost going back to what you were saying in the beginning. It's almost like that, because that's my pattern. Seeing it as, well, that's part of who I am.
Yeah, this feels right to me. But that's exactly the words you just said. Something I almost jumped out of my skin when you said that's just who I am. That's what people say when you're asking them about. My experience is that when people start talking about, this is who I am, it's just part of me. You're attacking me. Why do you want me to change? I've actually had people say, and people fairly close to me, is, you're trying to change me. I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to reflect something back to you about that there's some things that you're saying and doing that is coming from somewhere. And I actually, I want to reflect to you that there's a possibility that this is fear-based, and it might not be in your best interest, and it might not even be who you are. And there is a modus operandi that you can understand and then make some choices about all of this stuff if it's working for you. And the patent answer that I get is, no, this is just who I am. This is sometimes this is a part of me, but more often than not that it's me. And why would you want to? It's kind of like they're not questioning the ropes of the ring. They're just going, no, these are the ropes of the ring, and I'm going with this, and that you're interfering. You're actually interfering and judging me, and and there's a rejection of that thought process. That is probably my most common response to any kind of reflections like this, is that it's somewhat not showing up as an opportunity.
So maybe this is why you asked me earlier why that phrase stuck in my mind. And maybe it's got something to do with this now.
Well, yeah.
In a sense that I could go through so many years of just isolating or fencing off a certain area of operating and just saying, well, that's the way I am.
Yeah.
And not questioning it, not looking, I mean, there obviously were reasons it was too painful, it was not visible at that point, or I wasn't ready to look at it. It's too much. But what I was saying was basically, well, that's just the way I operate. So I was using that as a way of, in a sense, not questioning that this could be a pattern that comes from somewhere that was developed, it's almost like you feel that that's so intrinsically part of your personality and your modus operandi that it feels like it's too difficult to change, because you almost won't recognize yourself if you don't have that.
That's what I was going to say. Is people? It's the same as the ego and the inner dialogue. Is everybody we're so used to listening to that little voice in our head talking to us. Sometimes we're thinking, sometimes we're being thought, and people, because they're so used to it, they actually associate that to themselves. They feel a loss. They feel. So they're really not, this is me. I don't even think most people go, this would be too difficult to change. People are going, change? That is me. I mean, what do you mean change? Now this so feels like me. And you're suggesting I need to change something that's me. You're just like everybody else. It's just trying to change me.
And now we get to the fear. Because if I don't have this, then who am I?
Yes.
If you take this away from me,
empty.
This is who I am.
Yes.
Then, so there isn't, to be able to actually look at those kind of fundamental changes and actually investigate them with the potential that this could change and this could be released, means that there has to be some sense of self beyond this.
That would be true. There would actually, but there seems to be two things. Is there has to be but people's modus of operandi about how they function in being accepted and accepting themselves and how they look at the world.
Well, I'm thinking that there has to be a sense that the more somebody has a sense of self, authentic self, the more possible it is to look at certain behaviors and patterns and say, okay, this is not really part of who I am. This is something I've picked up along the way. This is something I've been using for many years.
Yeah.
This is, but if I let go of this, I still have my authentic self. But if I don't have a clear sense of that authentic self, then how can I let go of this? You can't choose because that. This is,
It seems to be twofold. The things that actually, the people that do it earlier and that they do it from a sense of self, and everybody else does it, if they're going to do it, is based on a crisis, that they're feeling pain. A lot of people aren't feeling pain. A lot of people are like, their life isn't, they've figured out how to live a life of just being their reactive self, and whatever's in here is sacred, and that they seem happy. They're not certainly asking any questions.
Okay, they seem happy, but doesn't that ultimately become more and more numbing and more disconnected?
You would think, but they seem to be, they seem to be. Some people are genuinely happy just doing what they're doing. That they have as much happiness as that it hasn't come to a crisis. They don't have two things. They don't have a sense of self that things could be better that's driving them, and they don't have a crisis of things falling on their head to be able to make some kind of change. So that they're busy enough and they're doing something they enjoy enough, and they have friends and a social life and generally a primary partner that their life is more or less happy. And there's a percentage of people that do that. But most everybody else is that there's a crisis that brings them to this place. And sometimes that's later in life. If it's a crisis, I mean, the middle-aged crazy or whatever they call that. What do they call it?
Well, it's like a midlife crisis.
Midlife crisis.
Yeah.
When people, that's the time.
It's probably when the shadow overwhelms. There's just too much content there that has to be dealt with, and it comes as a sort of tidal wave.
It comes as a tight. I think the real interesting part of that is I think that they have they've got a room full of stuff that's painful, and that I think it happens at around 50, 55, 45, somewhere in there, is because they look at their life on railroad tracks, and their mortality comes into it. They're like, oh my God, I only have so many years left to do this, and then that's what opens that door. Is like, they start realizing that this is their life. They don't actually have, forever. Because before that we feel like, we have forever. And we realize that we don't have forever, and that seems to be the thing that opens that door for many. And they start going, well, and then they start reverting back. I was happiest when I was in college. Most people, their happiest part of their life was college.
Yeah,
they buy a red sports car, get somebody that's significantly younger than them. Maybe they go traveling. Maybe they pick up their art again and they start painting or something like that. And usually that who they used to be isn't there for them anymore. They actually have to, not in this moment of who am I now, and finding out.
That's drawing on something from the past
Yes.
which doesn't exist, and trying to create an illusion, trying to move into something which is. It's not something that's actually appropriate for now.
And I think it's worth looking at, is because the people that are seem to be happy with being reactive of whatever's in here is sacred, and the people that do have a crisis and then they try to go back somewhere and that's not there, and they kind of live some kind of hybrid of trying to be figuring out how to be happier in this part of their life, is that unless they come to a spiritual awakening where they actually look inside or force themselves to look and find self, that they're just making do. They just try to make the best of whatever they got. They want to have. They create opportunities for what's fun for themselves, and they virtually just kind of desensitize and de-emphasize the parts of life that they really don't like, and that's the most that they can actually have. So there's a group of people that do that. The ones that interest me are the people that actually seek self. They actually have to have some kind of experience of self. That crises or that sense of self drives them to, either start seeking self or have more embellish that experience of self. So I think there's categories. I think different people, and I think those categories are also. I think there's more people coming to self now, is my experience. But I've been saying that forever. But it does feel that way. So I think we're creating categories here. I've never really thought this out exactly like this, so I'm enjoying that. We come from very different ends of that scale, and I really liked the path that I took, because I really did make decisions. That there was many times that many adults were telling me that this is how you live life and this is what you need to do, and it just went. I was looking at their life. I was like, I was smart enough to go, I think I make better decisions than you do, from a very young age. So it never really dawned on me to actually go that way. And that you embraced the list of rules of things that you need to do, and had your experience of life, and I want to look at the positive side of that, is that because you are so in tune with what people's needs are, that you are actually able to do that in seconds. You can feel where somebody is, you can feel what their needs are, and you can actually validate them. People love, in a spiritual practice of actually having people feel validated and be able to connect with them in a way authentically. Now you have that opportunity not to do it to be accepted, but to actually have them feel accepted and relate to them in a way that makes sense to them, but also makes sense to you, is really an amazing gift. And one that, based on my trajectory, I have very much less of. I have gifts, but I don't have that one. I guess I'm a little envious of that one a little bit as well, because it's not something that I needed to survive. They do say that the thing that your greatest pain becomes your greatest gift.
So this is an interesting thing, because in a sense the beauty of actually having crisis or pain or the kind of experience we're talking about, and getting to that point, is that you have the opportunity to face that shadow or
Yes.
that major issue that you've sat with and worked with,
whatever that big
life.
fat fear is. Yeah.
And get the essence of it, because in the shadow there's also the light shadow, the power, the qualities, the gifts,
The beingness, the thing that you really are, gets stuck in the shadow with you and is unexpressed.
Yeah.
So what about that?
Well, and it's just what you were describing, is that the opportunity then to take those skills that have been honed over years detrimentally or used detrimentally to reinforce.
You acquired that skill out of things that were hurting you.
But then
it's
you can
still
take
a
that
skill,
and use it in a very different way afterwards, which becomes, which, like you're saying, has the potential to be a gift.
It's a huge asset to you. It's like I'm just watching for you. I don't know if you consider it such, and I don't know if you see it as important, but I certainly do. I watch how you operate in the world, and I watch how you take care of people and validate them, and in a beautiful way. And it's really kind of a beautiful thing for people to feel any kind of acceptance whatsoever. And when it's authentic and comes from a good place, you can really do that in a powerful way that points them in a direction that's generally really good for them. So,
well, that's the difference, is that if I can cultivate it in a way that comes from an authentic, powerful place, and not to be not as I was using it before, which is really just based on an underlying fear and sense of trying to feel safe. I
think that's good for everybody, though. Is everybody knowing? Because I do like that saying. Is that what is your greatest pain, becomes your greatest gift, and knowing that nobody gets an easy way. You're in my experience of how we grew up with our relationship to our authenticity were very, very different, and that we both have very different gifts, and that no matter where you go and how difficult that was, when you come to authenticity, all of those things become very, very useful. So in the human condition, it's in spite of the fact we're our own unique snowflake of what what shapes us and what the criteria is that those things that hurt us then can be useful to almost everybody in some kind of way. So it's really a beautiful thing, actually. And that, just people knowing that, I think, is most people don't know that, and that they're judging, the decisions that they made and what happened to them and not accepting their journey. And I think that's really powerful to be able to do that.
I think that's true. That a lot of people don't realize that that's where their strength is in their uniqueness and in their authenticity. I think most people, as I was, are striving to try and figure out what's the most acceptable, what's the what'll get the most appraisal or acceptance. That sense. I think
it fits into, like, just to pull up the analogy a little bit more, as well as is that it's like in some really negative forms of what people, the decisions people have made and how their life has been shaped is like through addiction, for example, and like heroin addiction. The only people that can really counsel heroin addicts are ex-heroin addicts, because they've gone through that process and they know what the decision making is, and they know every one of those crossroads of what choices that they made when they were presented with many, many crossroads of doing something different in the face of hurting themselves and feeling pain and numbing themselves to that pain. And somewhere along the line, they actually made a different choice. And being able to, they're very, very useful with other people that are having that experience. In the same way, whatever has happened to you, like a lot of people, that's what I tell people, is whatever their pain is and whatever they've actually had to deal with, is that that's usually the thing that they can go and teach in transformation, the human development, and being conscious of self and getting to self, is whatever your pain was, is being able, if you had that experience, there's generally somebody else.
Right. So then what do you feel is your... So what do you feel it is that you can teach?
Mine is kind of the other way around, is because I did accept self, is that I've been able to, probably my greatest gift is where everybody else has to learn compassion in being able to accept their human condition. I did that very easily. as soon as I realized that I had a human condition, I didn't judge it. I didn't go, oh my God, I just judged myself. Oh, I did a little bit in the beginning. Actually, I did it a fair amount. But I could stick with it. It wasn't causing, because often, for me, the doorway to changing your life to a more conscious life is compassion.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you have that ability with people. You have the ability to understand.
Oh yeah, I'm very compassionate. Yeah. I don't judge my own human condition, so why would I judge yours? It's stupid. Why would you do that? So that's what I can actually teach people is that no, why were you judging yourself? Like, people are so quick to judge, it's so automatic, and then when they get on the transformational path and they go, oh, what I need to do is stop judging myself. It's all this automatic judgment central thing that's happening. And then they start, and then they go, okay, what I want to do is catch my judgments in the moment. And then the very next thing that they'll do is they'll catch a judgment. So they're starting to become conscious to look at the human condition. And then they know that they need to look at their judgments. And then the very first thing that they do is, oh my God, I judged myself again. Okay, let me get this straight. You're trying to catch judgments so you can stop them, and you missed a judgment, so what you did was judge yourself. So, and then they have to get used to, a hall of mirrors. So there's another mirror that comes in with that mirror. Okay, good. And that's probably the biggest trick about getting in the door of transformation and being really able to see what it is going on, is knowing that you judge yourself and that it's automatic. And then you're going to start judging yourself about your judgments and judging yourself that you didn't catch your judgments and what your intent is now. And that's a very tricky point in transformation. So one of my gifts is, just compassion is like, you didn't order this human condition. It's not under your design. It's like you don't remember making these decisions. Yes, I believe that the ego, the negative ego, is just a messenger. And the messages it's bringing to you is, our ego is only as good as the tools that we give it. And the tools that we give it are our beliefs. So if I'm judging myself, now why into that?
No, because look, what you're speaking about is compassion, which you have compassion for yourself,
yes,
as part of the human condition. You have compassion for others as part of, in their human condition.
Yes.
So the thing is, it's part of it's part of the way you operate in the world.
It's true.
It's not something that you consciously apply as a practice, but it can be applied.
I do. No, I do.
You do.
Oh, non-stop. I'm constantly.
No, but I mean, is it consciously? Or is it just something that you do?
No, I'm conscious. No, I'm conscious about it.
Okay.
There's still judgments. I don't have to be so conscious about the compassion anymore, but I did have to be. What I was saying is that the ego. So what was that about a compassion? Is that we're only as good as the tools that our ego is only as good as the tools that we feed it. What we feed it is our beliefs. The tools are our beliefs, and that in our beliefs are all of these judgments that we have, and we made those decisions somewhere along the line. We just don't remember making those decisions. I didn't decide we're going to have a human condition. We're going to have an inner dialogue. What I'm going to do is constantly have my judgments, focused back to me in my beliefs, where I actually have to, then I create them in the world. If I don't deal with them internally, then I externalize them, and all my beliefs come back to me. So I actually, if you believe you create your life, then that's what you need to start dealing with, is what's not ideal or what's not working for you. We didn't design any of that. So the reason why you need to be compassionate is it's not your design that you remember. You're not in control of it. It's in control of you. So why would it's like judging yourself that it rained today. It really doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. So you actually have to release yourself completely from having a human condition and what it is and what those beliefs are. All of it. You cannot judge any of it. If you want to be useful in a world of transformation, you release yourself from that completely. And then you can start going, then you become a scientist. And you put your little scientist hat on, and you get out your microscope and your magnifying glass, and you start looking, what is the nature of this? You start realizing it's a mechanism. What is the nature of this thing? Most of it's patterns. All the stuff that's not working is a pattern and a mechanism. So that's the stuff. And if you're judging yourself for a mechanism that's not under your control, every time your clock radio goes off in the morning because it's set in a particular way, and you judge yourself because it goes off at 6 in the morning, doesn't make any sense. And that's what we're doing. So that's my gift. One of my gifts is being able to actually release people from their human condition. You cannot judge any of that. It's silly. But and it's creating your life, so you have a thought system. It's probably, and that thought system is creating your life. It's probably a really good idea if your life isn't 1,000,000% satisfying you and exactly the joy that you want to live in, and I do say joy, then it's probably a really good idea to look at what that mechanism is.
So you're talking about a practice.
I am talking about, absolutely.
A daily practice. And
yes.
Throughout the day.
Yes.
And if you had to, the essence of that practice is examining. I mean, how would you describe it?
It's a lot of different things. It could be a lot of different things, but I got it down to 3 things.
Okay.
So I'm only looking for 3 things. The first one is anything about the ego when you're being first, best, and right. If you're being superior or inferior, either one of those 2 things, that's what you want to look at. Our entire society is set up around winning. That's what you want to actually look at, is look at all the ways in life that you're winning, that all the ways that because we believe that everybody's out for themselves and everybody's, trying to scratch together what it is that they want. And that's, you're believing in lack is what it comes down to, is that, the only thing that's fighting for me is me. And that we're believing that we actually have to do these things, and that we're, do you like to be dominated? Do you like it when people, cleverly figure out how to take something that's yours, one down you, make you look bad? It's virtually, in a corporate sense, you can really see this part of the ego most readily in the corporates. Just to understand it, even if you're not a corporate, to understand it, it's very clear there. Or the schoolyard. People are digging holes under you and pretending like they're not, is what it comes down to, and that we think winning and being the best is, what's important, and it's not true, or that we're actually collecting evidence that we're not good enough. So that's the first one, is look at all the places that's happening in your life and be neutral, and actually start looking at people as peers and equals. And that then only at that time, because only at the time that we can actually see people as peers and equals, and we allow them, we don't judge them, we allow them to unfold as they are, and that I am unfolding as I am, is the only time that we'll have the safety and trust just to be the way we are.
Yeah, because that's not an ego position.
It's not an ego position. If
people are peers, if people are equals, then it's not an ego position.
What becomes, instead of winning, what becomes important is being. Is that I'm just going to be. We're not, because all that other stuff is putting your thumb on the scale of reality. You're fudging the margins in some kind of way, so you're not going, oh, this is me naturally being like this, and that's you naturally being like that, being conscious about any patterns or karma, conditioned responses that we have. That's the best way. If we've all agreed, we want to get these conditioned responses out of our experience. So if we have that agreement, you and I, and maybe in a yogic philosophy kind of way, the yoga community is actually going, we want to actually interact with each other where we're not being first, best, and right, and we're not trying to be superior or inferior, so that we can just allow ourselves and others, encourage them just to be who they are. Then you can actually, for the first time, you can actually walk around in the world in safety and trust and be who you are, so you can get those reflections from everybody. That's the first one. It's first, best, and right. That's a gift that I give myself. I don't want to be first of all. Why would I want to be? It's useless. The second one is inference, is that I want to look at what I'm seeing in the world that's a pattern. So I'm constantly actually putting on the world what it is. I believe this about money. I believe this about men, women, South Africans. There's constant projection is perception. So, and what are you adding to the world? What are you seeing that's yours? Not what the world is that's your template that you're putting on the world. We see the world as we want to, because we've already predetermined how everything is. So being able to figure out what your patterns are. So constantly asking, you've got to test your thinking. When you said, did you mean? And that if you ask everybody that, especially in upsetting situations or fear-based situations or where there's anger or reactions, when you're going, when you said this, what did you mean? Because all of us have had the experience of, we say something to somebody, we mean absolutely nothing by it. We say it. And they go, how can you say that to me? And you go, say what to you? And they go, that. And I go, well, I know what I meant by that. What does that mean to you? And they go, oh, well, you're saying that I'm this kind of person. And there's a judgment embedded there and somewhere. And I would go, personally, I'd go, well, no, that's not what I meant when I said that. That's not what I'm feeling. That's not what was going on for you. I'll tell you what it was. This is what I was thinking. This is what was going on. This is why I said it. And a common response is, no, it isn't. That's not what you're feeling. That's not why you did that. And they're not believing you that that's what you're doing. And those are the places, all of us have had that experience. So you know people are projecting things into the moment. You know they are. So here's the interesting place. Where are you? Where are you adding meaning to the moment? And that's the patterns that you're creating, and that there's a life that you're creating for yourself based on that. So that's the second one, is what are your inferences and learning? You have to test your thinking, constantly asking the people around you about why they're doing what they're doing, and then comparing it to what you made up. It's a practice, constantly, especially when there's upset. And the third one is judgment. Judgment seals everything. So if we're being first, best, and right, or other people are being first, best, and right and superior, and we have the patterns that we're inferring meaning into the moment to describe other people's, usually what we do is we go, well, if I was in this situation and that's what I was saying, this is the reason why I'd be doing it. And that's not math you can actually apply. People are doing things for a lot of different reasons, and their reality is completely different, so you can't even guess that unless you ask. See, and another thing about the inferences are if you're only interacting with your experience of somebody else's inner world, you're never going to completely understand their inner world, but you can understand the basics of it, about why they're doing what they're doing. If you're only interacting with your interpretations of somebody else's world, at the end of the day, you're only interacting with yourself. And that I would rather interact, I actually want to know what you're saying. I actually want to know who you are. I actually want to know what's going on in this moment and how you're unfolding, so I can unfold with it and that we can have that experience together. We're not doing that in life. And that in a yoga philosophy way, I propose that as a yoga communities that we actually start looking at this kind of relationship with one another. I think that's important. What else is there to do? Have imaginary friends and imaginary experiences, and be judging each other and ourselves because we enjoy it? I find that not that exciting. And then the third one is judgment, is that so we're judging people for being first, best, and right. We're judging them from a place of that we're superior. We're generally in our inferences we're judging people, or that we have our judgments and we think we're right. We're righteous about our judgments and how things and people should be, which is a non-acceptance without all the information. So judgment seals all of that. Because of our judgments, we're not talking about there's something that's called the undiscussable, and that the undiscussable is even undiscussable in our society, especially corporately. People aren't talking about, oh, I think that you did this, and is that true? We don't do that. We don't go, oh, there's all this stuff that's undiscussable. There's these judgments that we have, and it affects how we work together. We're not doing that either. So, and it's the same pretty much anywhere in the world. We're very nicey in the yoga community, for example, and that everybody has their judgments, and there's the people that are right, and there's people that are righter. So that's the three things of the practice that I look at, is so that we can, start dealing with who we truly are and allow it. That's what it's going to take. Those social agreements is what it's going to take to actually is to be safe enough to be and trust people to be and have them be. And all that does, and having that intent, it's not just going to happen automatically, but you start cleaning your perceptions at that point, and you start cleaning your judgments, and you start cleaning your conditioning. From one another. How else are you going to do it? Nothing happens in a vacuum. You're not going to do it on your own. To a degree you can. Well, no, you had to have some stimulus somewhere along the way. But it just becomes that much more powerful and in the moment when you're doing it right here, right now, all the time.
Yeah, which makes it a practice that can be applied all day.
Yes. And that's virtually what Samkhya Yoga is. So that's my practice, and that's what I do. And there's a lot of tools for that. There's a lot of really amazing things to be able to do with that. So how does that, all those things,
any one of those, all three of those together, they're all incredibly powerful practices. Just as you were describing them, I was just thinking to actually apply this all day would completely transform the way you are in the world.
Well,
and your relationship with everything.
Yes. As an individual, I've done this for, probably almost 2 decades now I've been doing this. But you need social agreements. I've been in relationships where I couldn't create those social agreements with the ones that is my lover. I couldn't actually create that social agreement. So it's not, there's a lot of good that happens for me that I can do, but having social agreements, I have them with, some people and to varying levels, and some of them are because we've had the conversation, and sometimes it's because that's just what we do in certain ways. But really having a conscious choice to do this, it's got to start somewhere. I really don't. I think this is the evolution. I think we're headed that way. Why wouldn't we be? And it's all the things that we're talking about, and that. That's my feeling anyway. It's just that. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it resonates a lot because, in a sense, if I think of a practice that I apply for myself, it's around trying to take responsibility as much as possible, and it's a practice for me because it's not something that comes naturally. That's why it's a practice.
Really?
It's
okay.
Well,
in some way, and all of us in some way are taking responsibility for something, and I'm still out there.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, some things.
Whatever's annoying me in life. That's what you're not taking responsibility for in some way.
And that's the thing, and that's where I struggle to take responsibility.
So is there something you need to talk to me about?
It can happen in so many different ways, and it's really, as you were going through those different things, I mean, any one of those also is around taking responsibility for those things.
Exactly.
In what situations do I try and be first, best, right? You know, those kind of things, and take responsibility for that, and what the implications are, or what are the inferences, and take responsibility that those are inferences, and not
they exist, and then going looking for them.
Exactly. And the judgments, taking responsibility for judgments that I'm putting on the situation that I'm making about the thing. I mean, any one of those things I can apply in that practice of responsibility as well. So it makes complete sense, and that's why it resonates.
Do you have tools that you use in taking responsibility? Do you have any examples of what you have taken responsibility for, what you're doing differently, and what's your practice? Like, how do you do that?
For me, the practice is looking at the things that I see as being external.
Yes.
And judging in some way, or struggling with in some way, and then trying to internalize them.
And figure out how I'm creating that.
Exactly. So I'm trying to move. I'm trying to shift that from the external to internal, and the practice is, well, if it's happening out there and I'm struggling to understand why, then why is it that I'm going back to what you were saying? If this is a reflection, if the external is a reflection of the internal, then why am I not seeing it? Why am I not owning it internally? Why am I seeing it there?
Yes.
And there's nothing I can do about it out there.
No.
So the only place I can do something with it is here. But first I have to own it.
Yes.
So I have to go through that process of
making the connection between what's showing up in my life that's not making me happy.
Yeah.
And causing pain for me in some kind of way, and then being able to figure out, well, how am I? The question you ask yourself is, how am I creating this? And you look inside and go, so what is it that I'm doing that I'm in? Sometimes it's just judgment. I'm judging, this behavior.
Yeah, but taking responsibility for it by owning it and saying, well, there's obviously something.
How tough is that experience for you? Like, some things are more difficult than others.
Some things are a lot more difficult. A lot.
Yeah. They didn't make it easy. Who designed this thing,
Jeez.
They didn't make it easy. It's a little bit confusing. We need elders. We actually need people talking to kids about, what their inner dialogue is, and beingness, and who they are, and expressing themselves, and speaking the truth, and having integrity, and finding, where this, and it's a gift you give yourself, and being able to give practical examples where they can experience it and go, have it be experiential.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sense. I keep putting this up as the goal. Is that's where I'm wanting to get is that integrity, that sense of an integration between the internal and external, a sense of integration of what my inner world is and what I see reflected out there. Because if that's not, if I don't see the integration with that, then I don't have a sense of integrity.
Yes.
So.
Oh yeah. So that's now.
And that's almost what spurs me on to.
Yeah.
Say, okay, it's difficult to take responsibility for this, but if I'm interested in integrating, if I'm interested in integrity, if I'm interested in
having your life work for you,
then,
it's a gift you give yourself. I mean, really, how much pain do you really need that comes at you from the external world?
Yeah.
So the things that you talked about in regards to practice is that you, first of all, have realized that anything that's approaching you from the external world that is making you uncomfortable at any level is coming from you at some...
Yeah, uncomfortable and comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that the good stuff is easy to take responsibility
I don't really need to worry about the good stuff. Let's just leave it right where it is. Yeah, I don't need to. I got enough to worry about with my fears. I don't really need to go examining, too much.
Integrating it and taking ownership for, and responsibility for all of it. Sometimes something might be a success, and that's equally important to take responsibility.
Yes,
but
most people don't have a problem with that. Usually, success has 1,000 fathers. So usually that one. But there are some people that actually aren't allowing in their successes. They will not. They refuse to see anything good about themselves, and some of those people are the most. They're good people, and they have real talents. It's really interesting to watch people do that. Okay, so when in your practice that you go and it's now integral for you to actually look to see what's happening in your external world and look to see what the connection is in your inner world, and being able to accept the responsibility that that's true. How much of is that easy for you now, for example?
The practice of doing it is becoming more. I'm becoming more skilled at it. It doesn't mean that all of the issues are easy. So like you integrate one piece and you realize, okay, well then there's that piece and another piece.
Yeah.
So it's. But the practice of doing it is becoming more
fluid.
More fluid.
Yeah, you're having more skill. More skill doesn't minimize the things that are occurring.
It
just makes it so you can take on bigger bites and and process more information and turn it around faster.
Yeah.
So what's the next step that happens? So once you take a look at what's external, and then how easy is it for you to that's a skill right there, being able to identify that how you're creating that and how you're responsible for it.
Yes.
Do you have any practice around that? Or is it just too individually oriented?
Well, my entry point into that is always because the tendency when you see something that's not working for you, or that you struggle with, or that you have some sort of judgment around, the tendency is to separate from it, distance yourself from it, and say, well, that's out there, that's got nothing to do with me. So it always comes back to, but if this is my world, and if this is my experience, then at some level I'm creating it. So therefore, it's part of me. I'm just not taking responsibility for it. I'm just not owning it. So it's almost like creating that platform to say, no matter how difficult this is, no matter how different it looks or separate it looks from you, actually it's part of who you are.
How do you free yourself up to go that you're not judging yourself, that you're creating that? How do you go, it's okay that I'm doing that? How did you get over that hump?
I don't always get over that hump.
Oh, okay.
So
sometimes you're still judging yourself for what you find.
Yeah, I think judgments slip in there.
Yeah, from time to time, but they don't really slow you down much, or some of them still you beat yourself senseless with your own.
No, I think sometimes they also come in sort of frustration, because if you're going along with the practice and you're saying, well, I'm doing this and I'm getting more fluid at it, and well, how come I'm not better at this then? How come if I've been doing this for this many years that I'm not better at doing it? How come I can't integrate this quicker, faster?
Why am I not in the spot that I'm not?
Exactly. So, and of course, catching yourself with that and saying, that's not useful.
That's the other one thing is allowing is so important in the non-judgment in the beginning of transformation, the compassion. Part of that compassion is allowing what you find and where you are. I mean, people are they look and they go, God, I don't want to be there. This isn't where I am. I'm over there. Or I should be over there. And then, you start, as soon as you start judging, the reason why compassion is so important in transformation, the second that you go, okay, I now know that there's a human condition, there's some things I can do about that, and they start looking around, and then they judge what they find, or they think they should be different, which is judging what they find. They don't allow themselves their human condition or where they are or where they find themselves, that you start slamming. As soon as you judge yourself like that, you start closing transformational doors. You start sticking your head back in the sand, because we so reject pain. We so reject that self-judgment That's I haven't found anybody that can actually stand in there. In some way, they stick their head in the sand, and all those doors close, or most of them, and a lot of people quit several times with that. And then they come back to, I need to be more conscious. They start looking again. They start finding a few things, and instead of seeing them as the nuggets of gold they are from something that's automated, and that they're not in control of, that's creating their life, and that they just need to be a scientist, they go, it needs to be different, this is wrong, and then they stick their head in the sand. It's a horrible place to, it's definitely a common pitfall to keep your eye on, for sure. Sean, I'm still judging myself from time to time, but I'm pretty good at not doing that. Pretty good at it. Some that I'm still working on.
It's a practice.
It's a practice, hey?
It is.
But when you've done it for a few decades and you're teaching people this, you think that
No, but you see the potential for additional judgments on top of that.
Oh well, yeah. Then you got more opportunities. It's like, oh God, well, how could I still be doing this?
For judgment.
Yeah,
just because you've been doing something for a while and doing it.
And that you've taken so much ground, and you're not even applying your own rules. That you're actually that you can be unconscious and and still in certain ways. It's always fascinating to me. So, and then when you do not judge yourself, when you find that you want to be responsible for something that's happening on the outside, and that you find, I don't know what your process is how you connect them, the external experience and fact is related to some inner process, which I'm assuming is a belief of some kind, just in my lexicon.
Well, it's in a sense is to then take that and integrate it as part of self.
Yeah.
And to say, which means you have to overcome the judgments around it. You have to. There has to be a sense of compassion.
Yes.
And understanding that this is part of who I am.
Yes.
This is not something separate from me. This
yes.
is not something I
and
can
it's not
push
something
outside.
bad. It's not.
It's like I've got a whole lot of stuff that's been labelled bad that I picked up years ago, and we all have stuff that we've been told this is bad, that's bad, this is good, this is not. Everything gets categorized, everything gets labelled acceptable, non-acceptable.
We have to change that labeling.
And exactly, so you really have to pull up those beliefs and examine them, and say, well, where did I get this from? This is just a default belief that I've been living with for years.
And then what do you do? So when you come to where you see that it's a pattern,
well, change the belief.
Okay, and you do change the belief.
Yeah.
Okay.
Change the belief.
How are you with that? Like over time, like how? I have a particular experience about that. So when you realize that there's a belief that you've been externalizing, that you found that it's something internal, and then that you want to change that belief, what's your practice in changing beliefs look like and success rate?
If it's a big belief and it's worth really, and I have a sense that if I change this belief, it'll affect a lot of things in my life. I mean, some beliefs are small things you could just change.
They're not first on priority.
Yeah. I mean, in just sort of you question, okay, that just doesn't work. I don't need to believe that.
But it's easy to abandon just by being conscious.
Yeah, but exactly. But some beliefs are pretty well entrenched, and they're fundamental, and they're almost like foundation to a whole lot of other beliefs.
Yes.
So in that sense, giving it the attention it needs, perhaps in a meditative process or visualization process, I'll sort of visualize going into the subconscious, or in them symbolically, underwater, or underground, or something. And then,
but ultimately, making an investment in a different feeling and a different belief that actually helps you in the next moment when that comes up,
and creating a different emotion around that, a different feeling. So laying that back down in the subconscious with that feeling, so that it holds. I mean, to me, that feels like rather than just thinking something through. Some beliefs are easier just to through that awareness, but some beliefs have got that emotional. They hold in place with a very strong emotional.
There's some work
content.
involved.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's loosening that up and laying down a new belief with also with a strong emotional content, like an excitement about how will my life be with this belief, rather than the limiting.
And the investment is in that excitement, and that's the thing that actually starts coming eventually, because it's going to be through repetition that starts coming into the moment. Okay.
Yeah. So which is a much more expansive feeling and sense of being.
Okay. Then the one that you had.
Rather than the contracting, restrictive, fear type emotion that was holding the previous belief in place.
Interesting. I have a similar process. It's slightly different, but my practice is that I get a hold of what the belief is, and it's usually a sentence. Like I can, that feeling.
Yes.
That belief is a sentence.
Yes.
So I can actually figure out what that sentence is, and if I really look at it, doesn't matter how fundamentally that. We'll go with the biggest ones that you really have to work at in displacing is probably my best word for it. But every time something has come up in life and I've been reactive, you've got an emotional investment. That's what I call it. It's that it's a fear of mine, so I'm emotionally invested. When I'm worried about it, I'm emotionally invested, and when it comes up, I'm emotionally invested. So I have all, and I see it as an ATM. So this belief, I go stand in front of this ATM, and I've got lots of. You just take a look at all the time I've spent feeling this as it's being true, and I just see that as deposits, and that you can take a look at what the number of that figuratively of what that deposit is, and if I'm only going to displace that when I can stop making those deposits, those emotional deposits and investment in that belief, is when I can actually take them out of there and get in a different line. And I start going, so what do I really believe? Because when you take a look at those beliefs and you go, well, I don't even believe in that. The more I go along in a transformational way, I don't believe this is true. I don't believe in this sense of lack of whatever that is. And then I can go, well, what do I believe? What is actually true for me? And then I'll write a sentence for that, and I'll go, great. So then what happens in the moment when this one comes up? I remember going, I need to remember this. I flag this emotion. I can only flag one thing at a time. So when it comes up in the moment, whatever I'm being reactive to that I want to change, I flag that so that I become conscious to it. And that once I flagged it, then I start being conscious to it on a regular basis. But I'm so reactive, I can't remember what my new belief is because my investment is, overcoming me. So then what I had to do is I actually had to intend the first intention was I want to notice this in the moment when it happens. The second thing that I actually had to attach to it was a little message in a bottle about what do I actually believe now? What is my new truth? What is the thing that I want to invest in?
Because you have to replace it.
I have to replace it. And I can't remember in the moment because I realized I'm just overrun with the experience and my investment in the negative and the lack. Yeah. So then I would actually attach a bottle and I go, okay, I had to write it down and shit. I'd carry it around in my wallet. And I'd be digging in my wallet and oh, right, that's what it is. And then, because I can only work at one at a time, so there's only one thing in my wallet. I don't have to do that anymore, but it worked. And then in the moment I'd read it and I'd go, right. And then I could actually change my emotional investment right there in that moment because it wasn't my deepest truth. And I'd go get in that other line and I go, now I'm good. And it would change my actions. And sometimes I would remember 3 days after it happened, I'd be digging in my wallet. 3 days after something happened, to go, right, that's it. And that you could judge yourself for that. But that's the thing that got me closer and closer and closer to the moment of remembering what my new truth is in spite of the old one in the moment and being able to make that investment.
I like that way of looking at it as, is this my deepest truth?
Yeah.
And sifting through. I mean,
spending
a Saturday afternoon sifting through your beliefs, saying, is this my deepest truth?
Yes.
No, nowhere near it.
Yes.
Is this my deepest truth? No. No. Is this my deepest truth? Well, it's getting better.
It's getting closer.
It just actually, like the way you would sort of do spring cleaning or anything else. It's just like sort of sit there and say, what the hell am I actually believing? What are these things that are generating my reality that are left to their own devices?
Yes.
That have been unchecked for years.
Forever.
And they are generating all sorts of situations and things that I'm having to contend with on a daily basis.
Yes.
It's worthwhile to sit down and actually work out what these things are and what putting beliefs that are closer to.
I found that I got overwhelmed with having more than one. So it's a good thing to do spring cleaning and actually know what your emotional investments are. But I would pick the biggest one at any given time. What was really kind of annoying me about that this was my life experience. And that's the one I wrote in my wallet. But it's a good practice to be able to look at all of them.
I don't think I've ever tried more than one at a time.
Yeah, I can't.
The thought of a Saturday afternoon spring cleaning is a little bit overwhelming. I don't know where that came from.
No, but it's true. You can actually look at those things, and it's a beautiful experience. But I've noticed that having more than one, I couldn't actually displace my investment. I had to do them one at a time. Because it was just so... it took all of my ability. I didn't have any more bits to process more than one. And the words I want to use is being more aligned with who I truly am. more aligned with who I truly am. And those
aligned with who I truly am.
And then I'd go get in that line. And I had a practice in the moment when I was being reactive that I could change from one investment that I didn't want to an investment that I did want. And that's the only way I could do that.
Yeah.
So I'm very. That's a real gift to me. I really love that process and really have used that for my change, for being happier and more joyous and having a life that works for me.
I like that. It's like becoming a truer version of ourselves.
Oh yeah.
It's a lifelong journey. Sure. Wow.
Well, this is a lot of fun.
It's fantastic.
Do you have more, or is this?
I'm done for today.
Yeah. Well,
but,
just in closing, that that it's really great to be able to sit with somebody, and that I don't think we could have planned this. You can't plan this unfolding of the conversation that we've had, and just really happy to have somebody like you in my life that this can occur, because it's not a normality. And somebody that has the understanding of the landscape to be able to have these distinctions, to reflect back, what they're doing, and having practices to compare practices. And so I really value that experience, and I'm looking forward to more of the unfolding.
Absolutely, it's like journeying through the landscape. I like that way of seeing it, because it is about discovering, and then somebody pulls you over and says, well, how about and what about behind this hill and across the river over here? And I get that sense of journeying and traveling.
Yes.
That when somebody else is pointing out something and you're looking at this and you've got your way of doing it.
Yes.
And I enjoy that process.
Everything that I have, I've stolen from somewhere. And sometimes what your practice isn't going to help me at all. Yeah. Sometimes I steal little bits of it, and sometimes I steal the entirety. So really having other people to compare tools to is really a blessing. Yeah. So the more the merrier, frankly.
Fantastic. Enjoying this. Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you very much, Gavin.